Well, good morning. I know it's been a couple weeks. It's been kind of a hit and miss type thing. We were in Daniel chapter 1 and chapter 2, so if you haven't been here, this is like the off week that we're going to finish up Daniel chapter 3 is what we're going to do today. And if you weren't here last time, we spoke about in Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He's given this vision by God. It's a big statue, and God grants Daniel the wisdom to go ahead and interpret this dream and talk to the king about all of it. You would think that at some point in time that Nebuchadnezzar might actually listen to God and try to get some divine intervention and understand certain things about how this statue is going to be destroyed by empires that come after him. However, Nebuchadnezzar is a little hard-headed, just like many of us in some cases. And so today we're going to jump into chapter 3. This will be it that we'll finish up in this series, even though we could go through the entire book. And I've titled it Faith Under Fire as we go through all this stuff. And if you're familiar with chapter 3 or the story, you will see why. So we're going to find out how Nebuchadnezzar responds. And with that said, if you'll open your Bibles, we're going to start with verse number 1. I'll be reading from the New Living Translation today. And we're going to see how Nebuchadnezzar reacts. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar just had this dream, correct? He's got this statue, and Daniel goes ahead and tells him what God says is going to happen to this whole darn thing. And Nebuchadnezzar decides, well, if we're going to have a statue, let's just go ahead and make a statue, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. And it's huge. And you would think that after God says, hey, it's going to be you're going to be replaced by a chest of arms and silver, that he'd think a little bit better. But Nebuchadnezzar says, the heck, I'm going to be replaced. I'll show you. I'm going to go ahead and build a big gold statue of me from head to toe. That's how it's going to work, buddy, because you can't tell me what to do. I'm in charge of my soul, not you. So the idea from Nebuchadnezzar is, I'll put it out in the suburbs. I'll declare my power, my kingdom forever. So what's going on here? Now, I don't think this is totally Nebuchadnezzar being arrogant, even though when you first read it, obviously it comes across as that. And yes, he is to an extent. However, there is a meaning to his madness, if you will. You have to understand at this time, he just became the new king, correct? He's got this vast empire of Babylon. So he's got to be able to get all these new nations that he's consolidated and absorbed under his control in this vast empire. So he realizes that to do that, I have to call them to a higher ideal. Because human beings, we are instinctively wired that we need an absolute. We need meaning. We need something greater than ourselves to give us that meaning. So he doesn't want them to have a god over him, obviously. I mean, who else built a 90-foot tall, 9-foot wide golden statue if you don't think you're probably a god yourself of some sort? Jonathan Haidt, who is an atheist and a social psychologist, he wrote an article about the necessity of awe, is what it was titled. And he said, there's something hardwired about human beings. We're meant to stand in awe of something greater than ourselves and respond to it. And we would say as Christians, yes, because we know that we were made in God's image and we were made to worship. We need that, okay? We feel that empty feeling when we accept Christ. That's what we've got. And then Voltaire, who's a French Enlightenment philosopher, said, if there is no God, we must create one. We have to have something ultimate that gives our life ultimate purpose and meaning. So Nebuchadnezzar realizes this, that you need a higher standard. But I don't want them to have a God by which they could judge me. So I'll create a religion with a God who basically believes everything I believe in. So that's what he does. And he says, if I'm going to do that, however, I cannot appeal based on morals and values. I have to find another way. Incidentally, if you study history, that's what Rome did. Ancient Rome, Caesar would kill the Christians if you've read anything or you paid attention in history class whatsoever. And they did say you could worship whatever God you wanted to, just as long as you offered incense to Dea Roma, their goddess, one of, anyway. So Christians were persecuted not because they worshiped Christ, but because they worshiped Christ alone. Big distinction. Hey, you can go ahead and worship whatever you want to. However, you can't just worship one God. So they were meant to say Caesar is Lord, and they say, no, there's only one Lord, Jesus Christ. and they were murdered for their allegiance to God. And Caesar didn't want to be held accountable to anyone over him, because again, if you studied your history, Caesar thought he was a god of sorts. So here's Nebuchadnezzar saying, I'm going to rule, and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to establish a state of religion that's not going to reason with them based on virtues, so I'll appeal to their senses of display of power. And if we jump into verses 2 through 5 here, we'll see how he does that. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come, as I turn the page, to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all of these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue." Now, if you notice, there's an environment here, and it's an environment of intimidation. I'm going to build this huge statue, and I'm going to gather everyone. Okay? If you notice, and you've read through this, they will continue to repeat the offices. They will continue to repeat the musical instruments. And why do they do that? Is it the Bible being weird? No. They're trying to set this up and help you understand all the social pressure that is taking place at this point in time. Because he names every level of government, and anyone who's anyone shows up. So you've got members of the cabinet of administration, senators, congresspeople, governors, mayors, all kinds of different institutions of all these people that are there. And you look at this massive crowd as they gather around this statue, and it's not just the sight, but then he uses sound, hence the musical instruments. And he takes the greatest instruments from all the nations in that day and creates this cacophony of rousing music that'll stir the soul. So he appeals not to truth, but to their pagan emotion. Hitler used to do this exact thing. Hitler loved Richard Wagner's operas. Now, the ironic part is Wagner was anti-Semitic himself and also rejected God. He felt that Jews and Christians honored a lesser sense of men that were humble and meek. And both Wagner and Hitler thought they needed to return to the powerful Norse gods, gods of might, gods of power, so on and so forth. And enter Hitler, he does all these things with Darwin and eugenics, that there's only one race that needs to be, they're superior to the other ones, and so that's what we're going to do. But Christianity warred against that, because Christianity cares for society of sick and poor and feeble. But in their mind, if you cared for sick and poor and feeble, guess what? You were sick and poor and feeble and need to be discarded. Got to turn back to that Greek notion, right? Hitler would speak of a superman, if you will, the ultimate man, just like in Sparta. If they found a defect on a child, if you don't know what they did, sorry to throw this at you, but if they found a defect on their child, they would throw it over a cliff. Because you can't have a superhuman if the child has any sorts of defects. We only want what's strong. So for Hitler to carry that idea from a post-Enlightenment age, he would gather together these big moments of his speeches. And if you've seen the videos, right, they're all grainy and black and white. Sometimes you get them in color if you're lucky, if you watch a documentary on that. He would hold them at night, and he'd have the big flags of the swastikas out there, and he'd have fire surrounded all around. This was all by design. You can say what you want about the man, but he was intelligent. He knew exactly what he was doing at this time. And then he'd play music, because he wanted that music to be rousing. How many of you get in your car and you turn on the radio? You find this radio station you want, or you get on your Apple Music and you plug it in, right? It's the first thing you do. Music appeals to us. It speaks to us. But he would play Wagner's music, and they asked Hitler one time, what role does music play in your politics? And he says, oh, music is politics, because I'm going to employ intimidation to get you to conform. And if you don't, I'll kill you. Pretty simple. Now we go on to verse 6. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So immediately, that word gives a sense that the furnace is on site. So picture it in your mind if you can. You have a 90-foot tall, 9-foot wide golden statue, and you're going to bow down to this anytime you hear the music playing. If you don't, you're going to go in there, in that furnace right over there. Okay. And by the way, Nebuchadnezzar's done this before, so it's not like he's afraid to do it again. You're going to submit or you're going to be punished. You're going to conform because he wants to force them into compliance. Okay? Everybody's doing it, and you'd be crazy to disobey, and we're going to continue with that as we go to verse 7. So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. What do people typically do in the midst of relentless social pressure? You conform. You bow down. Some of you feel it. You say, well, I've got an allegiance to Jesus. But that goes against the grain of the environment you're in. At work, at school, some of you in your own families. That environment wants to squeeze and mold you into it, and how do you respond? What do you do? Many people, from middle school on up, they conform because I got to fit in. And they fold under pressure because it's too much. Verse 8. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. No, I won't. I'm going to honor God and not men. And that's what we love about this chapter, right? That's what we love about this story. Even if you're not familiar with the Bible, you're like, hey, what's that one story about that Shadrach, Mini-Hi, and Adonai guy? Whatever. They didn't conform, got thrown in the fire or something like that. They didn't do it, right? We love those stories. We love it when heroes push back. That's why we love movies, right? We like stuff like that. We want those guys to push back. We're drawn to that. We love the Rosa Parks that said, no, this isn't right. The Frederick Douglass that said, I'm going to disobey civilly because this isn't right. And of late, if I can get it popped up there, the city. But if you call me to disobey my king, no. That's where I draw the line. I'm not going to rage. I'm not going to stage a coup. I'm not going to try to overthrow you. But I will say no. And then I'm going to take whatever comes my way. I'm going to rise in the system, be faithful in the system. I'll be a good Babylonian, but if you ask me to compromise my faith, stand against the music, against the populace, against the king, against death, these boys are okay, willing to die. Because again, they're not going to try to overthrow Nebuchadnezzar. But what they will do is they're going to stand. And because they stand out. Now, if you remember chapter 1, they took a stand. But if you think about it, they kind of got away with it, right? They kind of got off easy. Wasn't that big a deal in that case. Okay? There wasn't much press, but here it says maliciously accused. In the original language, that literally means ate their pieces. In other words, they're going to eat you alive. That's how they're going to do it. You disobey, we're going to eat you alive. And some of you know what that feels like because you've been in those situations. Think about it like this. If you've ever gone to a church camp, if you're a teenager and you went, or maybe in high school you got to go to a church camp, and church camp's great. You go for 4 or 5 days, and everything's awesome, and you just start feeling this building, and Jesus is awesome, and he's going to get me away from my addiction, and I'm going to do all these other things, and it's great, and it's awesome. And by the last night, everybody's got their arms around each other and saying, friends are friends forever, and this is just great. And we're crying, and it's awesome. And then one of the ministers, youth minister, teacher, whoever it was, gets up and stands up and says, you know what? When you go back to your schools, when you go back to your town, they're sitting around the lunchroom table and they're talking vile things about those girls and saying those nasty things. They want you to watch those videos. You're going to stand up and you're going to walk away. And then you're like, I'm going to what? Yeah, you're going to walk away. No, you don't understand. Like, that's the lunchroom, man. Like, yeah, I can't exactly do that. I mean, I can be here. I can sing Jesus' name. I can come to church. I can sing praise songs all day long. I can get in my car and turn on K-Love and I can sing along with it. It's great. But when I go to work, this little light of mine, I'm going to keep it in my backpack. Because I probably need to keep it there. Because they're going to eat me alive. See, there's people in this world that are tolerant of you as long as you tolerate what they say. But the minute you disagree, they will devour you. And that's what happens here. Tommy Nelson, he's a pastor in Texas, just came across some stuff, and he tells a story of this gentleman. As Reggie White. Some of you that are old enough, you'll remember Reggie White. Reggie White was known as the Minister of Defense, because he actually was a minister, by the way. Played at the University of Tennessee, goes on, has a nice long NFL career. I don't think I'd want that guy lining up across from me or tackling me or anything. But there was a story that this pastor said that when he went to Tennessee, he was a Christian, and he wanted to be a good Christian. He wanted to honor God. So he didn't cuss. He didn't want to sleep around. He wanted to honor God with his body. So he did all these things, and he got made fun of relentlessly. Now, if you've never been in the college athletics world, some of us have been there, even at the maybe lower level, we can tell you some of the things that get thrown around. You think it's bad in high school. I promise you it's completely different, even on the college level, some of the stuff that gets said. Reggie White got made fun of. Again, not sure why you're making fun of a man that size, but go for it, I guess. And they say called him a goody two-shoes and all that, and one day they're at 2 days, the second part of the practice, and it's hotter than you know what, and they're out there, and one guy's like, yo, Reggie, how about you pray now? So Reggie does. Reggie says, oh, God, I pray for these men. They're wicked, and they think it's hot now, but they're sinners on their way to hell. Amen. Now, maybe you're not quite that bold, but he took a stand, and you can take a stand. Daniel, chapter 3, verses 9 through 12. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp. The decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But here are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of provinces of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. Now, if you read the context before, these guys got promoted in their political jobs. So these accusations, really, you could say, were based on jealousy. Because guess who didn't get promoted? Chaldeans. So a little bit of workplace jealousy. Imagine that, right? Doesn't happen anytime now, does it? So these people accuse him. Hey, king, they dishonor you. You gave them a raise, and look what they're doing now. They've angered the gods. They're putting us at risk. And they won't bow down before your statue. They won't get in line. They're threatening the thing that you're trying to build here. They're dangerous. If you look throughout history, there are groups of people who say the most dangerous part of our nation are the Christians. If you look in the Old Testament, Pharaoh, he wanted to get rid of the believers. And if you remember, Joseph kind of helped raise Egypt up, did he not? Made them prosper. Still want to get rid of them. Because there will always be people who think that way. Verses 13 through 15. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then, what God will be able to rescue you from my power? So Nebuchadnezzar hears his accusation. He brings him forward to validate the charges. Boys, is this real? Is this true? Like, why doesn't he just kill them right away? Think about that. Anybody else probably in this situation, he's just going to throw them into the fire no matter what, right? He's already stated it, but not these three, because I think he likes them. I think he knows these guys are actually pretty beneficial. See, the New Testament tells Christians we're supposed to work heartily as if for the Lord and not for men. Be great in all of our work. Be different, not different odd, but different better. And here, Babylon's thrived under the believer, and I don't think he wants to destroy them. But you need to get in line. So tell me, boys, you just misunderstood, right? Apologize. I'll strike up the band. We'll go on down the road, have a party. It'll be great. You just got to bow down and we can move on. But the boys give him an answer in 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." What does the believer do when they are pressured to deny their allegiance to their God? They don't rage against the king. They do answer respectfully, and they kind of don't answer really, because they say, hey, we don't have to give you an answer in this case, right? And that's not them being rude. They're just saying, we don't have to have a defense here to you. As to what God will preserve us, our God, he's able to. Your God, you're a defeated people. You've lost the sway in your culture. You don't even have a hometown. I took you out of it. It's gone. Think about what you're throwing away. Remember, I promoted you twice. What are you going to do with that? If I lose my life, that's okay. But what I can't be is unfaithful, and I will not bow. Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, he was a Christian martyr. He was bound and burned at the stake. Unfortunately, the fire did not consume him, and they had to stab him in order to kill him. Just put that imagery in your mind. You're welcome. But before his execution, they brought him before the crowds in Rome, and they asked him, they said, "Swear your allegiance to Caesar and reproach Christ." The bishop said, 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king and my Savior? I will thrive in the culture. I will seek benefit from the culture. But if you call me to deny allegiance to my king, absolutely not. This is where I stand. And if I die, I die. Notice, the boys have some confidence here without presumption, though. What God can save us? Our God. The God of heaven is our God, and he has the power to save us. They're confident in that power, but they're not presumptuous. Because they say, even if he doesn't, we don't know what his purposes are. He may want to bring himself glory by rescuing us miraculously. He may bring himself glory by us dying with honor. We don't know the outcome. And he doesn't need to tell us the future for us to know he's the king. How often do we want to know the future just to give allegiance to him? Then you go ahead. No, that's not what they did here. They don't know. We know. We've read the story, right? We've heard it. We get it. They didn't have a clue. But they're saying, even if he doesn't, we know whose kingdom's going to reign. We know where we're going. We know how this story ends. And even if we're not saved out of the fire, we're still not going to bow. Verse 19. There we go. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. And if you look right here, it became distorted with rage. Nebuchadnezzar is losing control. Who heats the fire hotter 7 times? If you want to punish someone, you're going to make it cooler so it goes a little bit slower, correct? But he's lost all control. He has no idea. He is so upset and so mad. Make it hotter. And then the result, verses 20 through 23. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. Notice how far God lets it get. He lets the statue be built. The boys get promoted. They're out there in the provinces, and they hear the music and are told to bow, and they don't. Think maybe we got away with it. Then some men call them out. Then they go and face the king. They say, we won't bow. And what happens? They get bound. They get led up to the furnace all the way to the top, shoved in and fall through the flames and hit the ground. God will let them go that far. See, sometimes God will not immediately rescue you from the trial, but he wants to save you through it. I'm going to read that again. Sometimes God will not immediately rescue you from the trial, but he wants to save you through it. And then he shows up. Verses 24 and 25. But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Why, yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men unbound walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Helps if I get to the right slide. Sorry about that. How many did we throw in there? 3? Why is there 4? Who's that guy? Why does he look like the Son of God? Well, I'll tell you why, because that's what God said through the prophet Isaiah in 43:2. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. See, that's what God does. He lets them get so far, and then in the hour of the need, he shows up. Because he's not just the Most High, he's Emmanuel, God with us. Now what you have here, and I won't dive into this because we get a whole big discussion on it, is called a Christophany. It's from the Greek word Christos, meaning Christ, and phanein, meaning to appear. It's a visible manifestation or appearance of Jesus Christ before his physical birth and life here on earth. And we see this throughout the Old Testament. In moments of God's greatest, or in people's greatest need, God shows up. He'll stand with me in the fire. And in these days, the Son of God arrives and says, "I won't save you from this day, but I'll stand with you. I'll stand with you through this day." And some of you, when you take a stand, God's going to let it go so far. And then miraculously change your station and stand with you. Some of you, he may stand with you like Stephen while you're being stoned to death. Whether by miraculous deliverance or whether by your honorable death, you don't know, but he will be with you. And why do we do it? Because we know the one who stands with us in our trial in the fire will ultimately establish a kingdom that will never fade. Tom Holland, the historian, not Spider-Man, okay? He said this about Christians in the early church. In the early church, they did not shrink from the blast of the crowd's breath, nor cower before the revolting humiliations visited upon them. On the contrary, they fashioned out of their ordeals a public display of their devotion to Christ. Whether gored by bulls, or ravaged by dogs, or roasted on red-hot chairs of iron, they cried out only the words they had repeated all along, a declaration of their faith, the willingness of Christians to embrace excruciating tortures, which, to those who sentenced them, could only appear as lunacy, was founded on an awesome conviction that the Savior was by their side. When we're put in persecution, God is with us, and he stands with us. Verses 26 through 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." So you see what happens? Nebuchadnezzar has respect for the believer. He has respect for God, even in defiance to him. And it's just like Paul says in the New Testament, if we offer our bodies as instruments of righteousness, people will see us differently. in a good way. Not different like, man, that dude's odd, but why is he so weird? But they see the unwavering commitment to God, and it forces them to take God seriously. Verse 29. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Now, this really isn't what God's looking for from Nebuchadnezzar, but he's kind of on a journey here. And we're not going to have time to get into it, but I would encourage you to go ahead and read the rest of Daniel, and you'll see this journey that Nebuchadnezzar's on. Okay? At this point, Nebuchadnezzar's probably trying to appease God. He's like, yo, man, I'm sorry about that. And anybody who makes fun of this God, I'm going to kill you. And God himself could have killed Nebuchadnezzar a long time ago, but he's not here to destroy his political opponents. He's here to save him. And again, if you continue to read on, you'll see what I'm talking about. So how does the believer in Babylon live? With faithfulness to God, believing he may save us out of the fire, or he may send us in to die well. Either way, he's God with us, who stands with us. And when the world catches us living out our convictions, it will force them to take Christ more seriously. And Babylon will change because of the faithfulness of the believer. As the praise team comes forward, there's a church in Rome, San Lorenzo Church it is. And I'm kind of a history nut on this stuff, so I watch documentaries and all that stuff, and my wife doesn't watch them with me. She finds them boring. But that's okay. She watches Hallmark over and over again, same ending all the time, right? You guys are laughing because some of you watch it. Some of you ladies are smiling right now because you know what I'm saying. But in the sanctuary above the doorway in this church, there was something unique. As you go out the doorway, there's two stones that look like bowling balls are embedded in the wall there. And what those were measures. So if you would have transaction, they measured out the grain, those type things as you transacted your business. And as you'd leave in Rome, they wanted you to honor the gods for delivering your food. So you would offer a pinch of incense to the gods and say, Kaisar Kyrios, meaning Caesar is Lord. But the Christians wouldn't do it. They would say, Kyrios Jesu, Jesus is Lord. But here's the problem. If a Christian refused to bow to Caesar, they would take their head and they'd knock it against the wall. Hey, you want to try that again? You want to go ahead before you leave? Let's go ahead and try that saying again. And the Christians would refuse to do it. And so they'd knock their head against the wall again, simply because they had allegiance to Christ. Because they were persecuted back then. They were beaten and they were mocked. Ultimately, they didn't bow. And because they didn't bow, the Christian culture grew. Because people watched them be different. Backwards. Strange sometimes, but beautiful and courageous. And humble. And more, the Romans bowed to the knee of Jesus. Because ultimately, Rome bowed to Jesus. So this church was built, and they embedded these stones in the wall to remember the faithfulness of the believers who purchased the right for them to be in worship in this space. It was almost like, hey, as you walk out, see that? There was other people who died for that, so that you could worship this morning, so that you could have that freedom to do that. Now it's your turn. Don't forget what they did and what they went through for you to be able to do that. Be faithful now. There's always going to be people that rage. There are going to be people that disagree. There are going to be people that want you to be tolerant until you disagree with them. But for the Christian, you stand. And you take the hits that come. And you don't hit back necessarily, because you're going to see ultimately God's aim is not to destroy the Nebuchadnezzars of the world, but to save them and everyone who would believe in him. Maybe that's you this morning. I'm not necessarily calling you Nebuchadnezzar, But maybe you haven't answered that call. Maybe that heart has been yearning for that something else, because remember, we're hardwired to worship, and we're missing something. And you need someone to stand with you in that fire. And no offense to your wife, no offense to your children, your best friend, or anything else like that, not that they wouldn't stand beside you, but there's only one who's going to come and save you. And that's Jesus Christ. If that's you, please feel forward to come as we stand and we sing.